Alright, so the last video unexpectedly cut me off, let me record for 15 minutes, and then actually only showed 6, so, yeah, basically what I was talking about is that the structure of analysis is the same as the structure of argument. You have a point, and then you have support. The point just happens to be about a literary text as opposed to being about a topic, water conservation was the example I was using. So some other ways to get into talking about poetry besides looking at the language, you can look at specific images, and I think I already showed you that one. And you can also look for symbols. And a symbol is something that it is something literal, but it also seems to have figurative importance. So William Blake has a poem called The Sick Rose, and in that poem he describes a rose. Very literal. You know, the rose was sick. It had a worm coming out of it. It was decaying. And so when you look at that poem, you think, oh, this is about a rose. Well, yeah, it's about a rose, but it's pretty clear from the tone of the poem and from the fact that it's a poem that it's not just about a rose. It's actually that the rose has symbolic significance, that it stands for death and life and all of these things that are much larger than the rose itself. However, a symbol doesn't always have one meaning, and you're not looking for some sort of special key that fits in the lock and unlocks the symbol and then unlocks the meaning of the poem. That's not the way that it works. Instead, you're looking for ways that you can find significance in the poem and that you can do an entire reading of a poem. And other ways to go about that are with other types of figurative language. So things like metaphors or comparisons, similes, which are a type of metaphor using like or as, personification, where you take an inanimate or non-human thing and you humanize it by giving it characteristics or having it do things that it wouldn't normally do. And those things will also help you look at poems, and we can look at some examples of these in the poems that I've assigned to you, and we'll look at a few of them. Talked about Szymborska. Okay, so the beginning of Letter Composed During a Lull in Fighting, for instance, is a metaphor. I tell her I love her like not killing her 10 minutes of sleep. And so, is that a normal thing to say in a love letter? I mean, that's a question that you can ask. And you also want to think, okay, if it's not normal, which it's probably not, let's think of some other love poems, famous ones, like Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate, right? Comparing to a summer's day, although the poem is sort of subverting that metaphor, it is a pretty typical thing that you would do in a love poem. And I tell her I love her like not killing. How would you feel if somebody said that to you, right? This is a love letter, and somebody says, I love you like I love not killing. What? I mean, that's pretty odd, right? Or I love you like I love 10 minutes of sleep. We're not talking about real poetic romanticism here. So what is the significance of showing that at the very beginning? Is it gesturing towards the fact that we usually use metaphors in love poetry? And if we use these metaphors that are decidedly not romantic, what does that mean for the situation? How is war different? Do we usually hear of soldiers writing these flowery love letters? Do we think of love letters as being flowery? And so there's all sorts of stuff going on, even in just this first little simile. Not to mention in the rest of the poem. Daffodils. In this, daffodils may be a symbol. I'm not going to tell you what they're a symbol for, but why daffodils? Is it all literal? Is it the fact that this is a true story? Well, why write a poem about it if the daffodils aren't important? So why daffodils? This happens in all sorts of these poems where you have these moments that are significant, and we're just going to look at real quickly. I want to talk about Rite of Passage, because this poem does a really good job of showing you why one specific word choice can make a lot of difference in the meaning of the poem. So here we have the beginning of Rite of Passage by Sharon Olds. As the guests arrive at our son's party, they gather in the living room, short men in first grade with smooth jaws and chins. Men in first grade, that's a little odd, at least to me. When I read it, I think, if I were going to talk about first graders, they'd be first grade boys, right? We in our society, we say boys. Men is somebody a lot older, and we talk about that rite of passage. That's the title of the poem, where boys become men. So why is she suggesting that these little boys in first grade, 6 years old, are men, short men? What does that mean? What does that mean to the overall interpretation of the poem? And she wouldn't have chosen to say that if it wasn't important, right? Yeah. So even just in that, looking at that one line, we see all of this importance, all of this weight to that language, and that's going to happen in every one of the lines. So as you're looking at your poem, you need to be reading through line by line and looking at the specific language of your poem. That's the job of this essay. So I hope that helps clarify just a little bit and gives you some ideas. And let me know if you have any questions before you submit the essay at the end of this week.